So Pokémon Remakes. I personally don't mind these remakes since they not only fix some issues with the original most of the time, but they also make the experience more accessible to newer generations and make it easier to complete the National Pokédex. Unless you're BDSP Spinda. But if people hate the remakes for being, well, too much of a remake, they'll just go for the scalper's listing of the definitive version. This video will not only discuss the very mixed opinions on Pokémon Remakes, but a little bit about why some of these games are so expensive. Not a lot though, since I might discuss it in the future, as if there's not other videos talking about the same topic already. The first Pokemon remake I played was Shining Pearl, and yeah, it was Pearl with quality of life changes and an HD coat added to it. But considering that these games were made by a third-party developer, there was only so much they could do. I also played the other 3 remakes, so I can give my honest opinion on them right now. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire are great, but it strays too far from the originals, feeling like a Hoenn version of X and Y. Not that it's a bad thing, these are actually my favorite remakes. Heart Gold, Soul Silver are visually pleasing games. Some of these graphics are the best I've seen, but overall the gameplay was pretty unbalanced. Even though Johto is home to some of my favorite Pokemon, the gameplay just didn't stick well to me, and the remakes didn't help with that problem. Chikorita still unfortunately sucks in its own region, which is expected, but the level gaps are probably worse than the originals. But if you look beyond the gameplay, the additions are nice touches. Johto now has a Safari Zone, which is very confusing and is not that worth using, I believe. But at least there's a Pokeathlon, which I actually never have tried. The Pokewalker is also a nice accessory, which I absolutely love. Is it weird that this gadget is my favorite part of the Johto remakes? Fire Red and Leaf Green, being Kanto remakes, had to be somewhat faithful Kanto experiences. That means locking non-Kanto Pokemon, including evolutions, cross-region trading, and most of the Sevi Islands to the post-game. These remakes are also not safe from bugs like the bad IV legendaries and the roamers using Roar to disappear from the face-off Kanto bug. And I might be salty about the fact that 2 of my favorites are locked behind different versions. So yeah, every game has its fair share of issues in my opinion. But I decided to grab some info from the community and see their takes on the remakes. Obviously, people like Fire Red Leaf Green since it's not as glitchy or unbalanced as the originals, and if you want to play something closest to the originals, these remakes are the best option, considering that Let's Go also kinda strays quite a bit far from the originals, introducing the catching elements from Go. The Johto remakes are very popular among the community from my experiences, especially when BDSP came out and those games were hated. More on that later. But come 2024 and I start to see a little bit more people actually disliking these remakes now? That was a bit of a turnaround. Yeah, there are still people that consider Heart Gold, Soul Silver as their favorites, but now there are some people who consider these the worst remakes. As for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, it's gotten a lot more attention recently, and is a very loved remake among the community now. But some fans also consider it not quite a remake, like I mentioned previously. It's also very easy to complete. Then we have BDSP, the most mixed Pokemon remake I've seen. Some fans hate it, some fans love it. Well, okay, I've never heard of anyone who loved these games. They're pretty okay with the games, as they're better experiences than Diamond and Pearl, but don't fulfill their Platinum tastes enough to raise the bar any higher than that. That's why people love Heart Gold, Soul Silver more. Those remakes had more crystal elements put into them, and Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, while not really having much Emerald content, did have the Delta episode, which is the closest thing to such. The main issue people have with these games is because they weren't definitive version remakes. That's why Platinum seems to be like $200 more expensive than Diamond and Pearl, despite being the same game with extra features. But we gotta at least praise BDSP being made in Unity, otherwise fan improvements wouldn't exist. Now with the 10th generation inching closer, the next Johto remakes and the first Unova remakes seem like they're going to happen. I mean, the last Johto remakes came out 15 years ago with the Virtual Console re-releases coming out 6 years ago, so it's about time for a new Johto experience. As for Black and White, those games are a year younger than Heart Gold, Soul Silver, so Pokemon remakes should be on the horizon. While a few people are hopeful about Johto and Unova remakes happening, others just wish the remake stopped entirely. But what about the newer generation? They'll never be able to experience the originals due to the ludicrous prices. And you'd be right, with some wrongs. People think that Game Freak should just release all new experiences in older regions, much like they did with Legends Arceus and plan to do with Legends Z to A. As for playing a faithful version of the region, people were thinking about re-releases of the older titles. Some people expected re-releases to appear on the Nintendo Switch Online, Game Boy, and GBA apps, which doesn't sound too hard to implement. They did it with Mystery Dungeon, but the issue with mainline Pokémon is compatibility. You probably wouldn't be able to transfer Pokémon from the mainline games on Nintendo Switch Online to home, which is why people think they'll either re-release the games as standalone releases, like with the 3DS Virtual Console, or as a collection. There are issues with re-releasing old content though. Firstly, the lack of quality of life changes that exist in newer gens. No fairy type, no move updates, no abilities pre-Gen 3, and possibly no online battling unless they somehow add that sort of thing on the re-releases. For the DS Pokemon games, it'll be very hard to port to the Switch and its successor, because they both lack 2 screens. The Wii U could port DS games because the gamepad and TV served it to 2 screens, but try porting a DS game for the Switch without it looking ridiculously crunched. Lastly, you probably won't be able to transfer Pokemon from other games into these re-releases. In remakes like BDSP, you could transfer Pokemon from newer games as long as they're in said game. If I want to transfer my Cherubi I caught in Legends to Shining Pearl, I can do that. Transfer my Marill from Scarlet to a potential Crystal re-release? That might be impossible, especially since Pokemon transferred from the Kanto and Johto Virtual Console releases to Bank can't be transferred back. That may not sound bad until you realize if a Gen 4 game ever got a re-release, it would be impossible to complete the National Dex due to some Pokemon being locked behind the GBA. Gen 5 also suffers from this, with there being Pokemon locked behind Gen 4, requiring Poke Transfer. Also, the Game Corner. So the way I'm seeing things, remakes will probably still come and will probably still be hated by some people. But what are your thoughts on Pokemon remakes? And what would you like to see when it comes to remakes in the future? Would you like to see full-blown re-experiences, simple re-releases, traditional remakes, or all? Originally, this was meant to be a video on why Pokemon remakes are overrated, but I think it felt a little too straight to the point for my liking. And I liked including some of the fanbase's opinions to see what's the best output Pokemon could perform in the future. I even created 2 polls on whether they'd pick the original Diamond and Pearl games or the remakes. And even though the remakes are on top, there are still a few that prefer the originals. Anyways, that's the end of this video. I've been busy with work, so videos are coming out less often, but expect quite a bit of varied content in the future.